What happens when a country music star who has clawed his way out of addiction, poverty, and prison suddenly finds himself sitting across from a talk show host who has built a reputation on being louder, sharper, and more self-assured than everyone else in the room? What you're about to read is not just another celebrity interview gone sideways, nor is it some routine clash of personalities. This is a collision, an emotional, unpredictable confrontation that unfolded live on daytime television, capturing millions of eyes and leaving the audience stunned, breathless, and divided in ways no one expected. Jelly Roll, the massive, tattoo-covered musician with a voice shaped by pain and a heart softened by experience, entered the set of The View that morning believing he was about to have a conversation about hope. He expected an interview that highlighted his extraordinary transformation, from a troubled kid locked in juvenile detention centers to a man who found redemption through music, fatherhood, and a relentless desire to be better than the person he once was. For years, his fans celebrated him not just for his hits, but for the raw honesty he brought to every stage, every podcast, every documentary, every moment where he opened up about the darker parts of his journey. But Jelly Roll had no idea that sitting across from him was someone who had absolutely no intention of celebrating his transformation. Joy Behar, a veteran host known for her quick tongue and sharper opinions, seemed determined from the moment he sat down to dismantle him piece by piece. To her, he wasn't a symbol of second chances or personal growth. He was an easy target, and she went after him with the kind of smug confidence that only comes from decades of sitting behind a desk with cameras rolling and a studio audience ready to applause on cue. Before we get into the storm that followed, take a moment, because trust me, once you hear how this unfolds, you're going to have a lot to say. Comment your thoughts below, hit the subscribe button, and prepare yourself, because this story isn't just surprising. It's explosive, uncomfortable, and completely unforgettable. Now, picture the scene clearly. The studio lights were blazing hot, those intense, unforgiving bulbs that make everything feel a little too sharp, a little too exposed. Jelly Roll tugged at his black button-down shirt, trying to get comfortable as he settled into the famous curved chair that so many stars had sat in before. The audience was alive with excitement, especially the pockets of fans who had followed him from the gritty underground rap scene to the top of the country music charts. For them, seeing him on The View was proof of how far he had come. The morning felt promising. Whoopi Goldberg had just wrapped the opening segment, tossing in her usual wit and warmth, and the mood in the studio was bright. The cameras shifted, the stage manager gave the cue, and the interview began. But within seconds, yes seconds, everything changed. Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair with that trademark expression, eyebrows slightly raised, lips pursed, a smirk that suggested she was about to deliver the kind of question that wasn't actually a question at all. Jelly Roll could feel it. The audience could feel it. Even Whoopi seemed to sense that something was coming. Something messy, something sharp, something that didn't belong in what was supposed to be a celebratory conversation. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television. Joy didn't ask about his music. She didn't ask about his recent awards, his touring success, or the way he had used his platform to raise money for rehabilitation centers and incarcerated youth. Instead, she dove straight for his past, using it not as a point of admiration for how far he'd come, but as a weapon to question his credibility, his character, and even his right to sit on that stage. And Jelly Roll, caught off guard but trying to stay composed, answered with the same honesty that made millions of people fall in love with him in the first place. But Joy wasn't done, not even close. She kept pushing, interrupting, reframing his answers to fit her narrative. The tension in the studio rose like heat from asphalt. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi shot her co-host warning glances, silent signals that she needed to pull back. But Joy ignored them. She had decided that this was the moment she would challenge him, call him out, or depending on how you look at it, humiliate him. What she didn't realize was that Jelly Roll wasn't the same man he used to be. He wasn't the angry, impulsive teenager who reacted with fists and fire. He wasn't the young performer trying desperately to prove himself. He was a grown man, a father, a husband, and an artist who had learned the value of patience, respect, and emotional control. But even the calmest person has a breaking point. As the minutes ticked by, the hostility became impossible to ignore. The conversation shifted from tense to confrontational, from confrontational to explosive. Viewers at home could feel their stomachs knotting. Clips began circulating online within minutes, and by the time the segment ended, social media was already ablaze with commentary, outrage, and disbelief. People weren't just reacting to what Joy said. They were reacting to what Jelly Roll represented. To many, he was a symbol of the idea that people can change, that your past does not forever define your future, that redemption is real and worth celebrating, and seeing someone try to tear that down on live TV hit a nerve. This was more than an interview. It was a moment that exposed the clash between two very different worlds, the world of someone who has survived the darkest parts of life, and the world of someone who has the luxury of judging from a distance. Whatever side you fall on, one thing is certain: this confrontation will be talked about for a very long time. I think you're misunderstanding what this is about. Jelly Roll's voice, usually warm and grounded, carried an edge that hadn't been there before. He leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked onto Joy with a steadiness that made the studio grow noticeably quieter. This isn't PR. This isn't some carefully rehearsed publicity tour where I sit here reading off cue cards. This is my life. These aren't talking points. These are real experiences, real mistakes, real consequences that shaped who I am. But Joy Behar wasn't moved. In fact, she seemed energized by his sincerity, almost amused by it. Her expression sharpened, her smile turned thin and cutting, and her posture shifted like a hunter settling into position. She had that unmistakable, predatory gleam in her eyes, the kind she usually reserved for political guests she wanted to corner. It was the look that said she smelled blood in the water and intended to go in for the kill. "I'm just saying," Joy began, her voice dripping with feigned reasonableness, "it's very easy to sit here and talk about redemption and second chances when you're sitting pretty with a record deal, money, and soul. Doubt concerts, that's easy." She flicked her hand dismissively as though brushing away a fly. "But what about the people you hurt along the way? What about the communities that were damaged by the drug trade you were part of?" The accusation didn't just land. It hit the studio like a thunderclap. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Audience members froze in their seats. Even the camera operators paused, their lenses lingering on Jelly Roll's face, waiting for his reaction. The air grew heavy, thick, charged with tension, as if someone had dimmed the lights and cued a dramatic soundtrack. Jelly Roll's transformation was visible to everyone, and it was happening in real time. The relaxed, humble guest who entered the studio earlier, smiling, grateful, hopeful, had been replaced by someone infinitely more intense. His chest rose and fell faster. His breathing changed from steady to controlled, like a man trying to keep a lid on something dangerous. His posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and the warmth in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a fire that made the audience instinctively lean back. Joy Behar had crossed a line, and everyone in that studio knew it. "You want to talk about the people I hurt," Jelly Roll said, his voice no longer soft but edged with steel. His tone rose, not in anger alone, but in conviction, like a man who had carried guilt, loss, and lessons on his back for years, and finally had enough of being reduced to his darkest chapters. "Let's talk about them." He continued, louder now, the emotion in his voice reverberating off the studio walls. "Let's talk about how I've spent every single day since I got clean trying to make amends. Let's talk about how I've gone back into the neighborhoods I grew up in, not with cameras, not with a film crew, but by myself, talking to kids who are headed down the same path I was, trying to tell them." "There's another way," the audience murmured. Even Whoopi Goldberg, who had been quietly observing from her end of the table, shifted in her seat as if preparing to intervene. But Joy wasn't finished. Whether she was oblivious to the danger she was walking into, or simply didn't care, she pressed on with her attack, her voice cold and unyielding. "But that doesn't undo the damage, does it?" she snapped. "That doesn't bring back the lives that were lost to overdoses. That doesn't repair the families that were destroyed. You can't erase that with a few charity concerts and motivational speeches." The words were brutal. They weren't questions, they were accusations disguised as commentary, and they cut through the studio atmosphere like a blade. Jelly Roll blinked, stunned, not because he couldn't handle criticism, but because of the sheer harshness of her approach. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. He looked down at his hands, then back up, as if steadying himself, as if reminding himself of the man he had fought so hard to become. He inhaled deeply. And then he spoke. "You think I don't know that," he said, his voice lower but far more dangerous now. "You think I haven't woken up every single day of my life wishing I could change the past. You think I don't carry that guilt with me, every hour, every minute." His voice quivered, not from weakness, but from raw honesty. "You're talking to me like I'm proud of what I did. I'm not. I've spent years trying to rebuild what I broke. Years trying to become a man my daughter won't be ashamed of. Years trying to help people get clean, stay clean, survive. But you—" He pointed toward Joy, not aggressively, but firmly. "You're sitting here acting like people can't grow, like people can't learn, like redemption is something only certain people deserve." A hush blanketed the studio. Even Joy seemed caught off guard for a brief second, but only a second. "Well," she said coolly, "redemption isn't automatic. It's not guaranteed, and not everyone you hurt gets that same chance." Jelly Roll stared at her, his jaw tightening, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. His past was no secret, but never had he been attacked with such blunt force under the guise of daytime talk. "Show civility." He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, eyes blazing. "I know that," he said slowly. "But don't you dare stand there and pretend I'm not trying. Don't you dare reduce everything I've done, everything I've fought for, to a headline for your show. I can't erase the past, but I can stop it from repeating. I can help people climb out of the same darkness I lived in, and that's what I do." His voice cracked, not from fear, but from carrying the weight of years of regret, healing, and responsibility. The room was silent. Joy opened her mouth to speak, but for the first time since the segment began, she didn't have a quick comeback ready. And for the first time, she realized the man across from her wasn't someone she could tear down with a few pointed questions. He had lived through battles far harsher than anything a talk show could throw at him. And he wasn't going to back down. Those words were the trigger. The spark that finally ignited the fused joy had been stubbornly lighting from the moment Jelly Roll sat down. Everyone in the studio felt it, even before anything happened. It was the shift in the air, the faint electricity that rolls in seconds before a storm breaks open. And this storm wasn't one anyone was prepared for. Up until that moment, Jelly Roll had been doing everything in his power to control himself. Years of therapy, recovery meetings, mentorship, and self-discipline had taught him how to manage anger, to breathe through it, to recognize it, to redirect it. He had faced harder situations than this interview, harder people than Joy, and had learned how to stay steady even when provoked. But everyone has a breaking point, and Joy Behar had just found his. Something in Jelly Roll snapped, clean, loud, and unmistakable. It was like watching a steel cable finally give way under years of tension. His eyes, already intense moments ago, darkened with a fire that burned hot enough to silence even the whispering audience members. His jaw clenched, his shoulders rose, his entire stance shifted from defensive to dangerous in a single breath. The explosion was immediate, not delayed, not gradual, instantaneous and volcanic. Jelly Roll lurched upward from his chair with a force that startled the entire panel. The heavy studio chair shot backward, rolling several feet and nearly tipping over as the momentum of his sudden movement propelled it away. His 6-foot-plus frame towered over the desk and the hosts, casting a shadow across the table. The lights above caught the tattoos on his arms, making them look darker, sharper like storm clouds etched into skin. "Are you kidding me right now?" he thundered. His voice didn't just fill the room, it shook it. Every syllable carried the full weight of years of guilt, redemption, struggle, pain, and transformation. His southern accent, usually soft and friendly, now cut through the studio with thick, raw emotion, fury laced with heartbreak. "You think I don't carry that weight every single day?" he roared, his voice echoing off the production equipment. "You think I don't know exactly what I've done and exactly who I've hurt?" The audience gasped loudly, an involuntary, unified shock that rippled across the room. People clutched their seats. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." As Jelly Roll continued, his chest heaved, and he jabbed a finger toward Joy. Not threatening, but defiant, demanding to be understood. "Lady," he snapped, "you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." The entire studio descended into chaos. Camera operators scrambled in every direction, adjusting angles, zooming in, capturing every flicker of emotion on his face. One producer gestured wildly at another behind the cameras, silently mouthing, "Do we cut? Do we cut?" Control room voices buzzed frantically in the host's hidden earpieces, debating whether to go to commercial, whether to intervene, whether to let the moment ride. Whoopi Goldberg sat frozen, eyebrows raised so high they nearly touched her hairlines, speechless for the first time in the entire show. Sarah Haynes clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and shimmering with shock. Alyssa Farah Griffin looked like she'd been carved out of stone. Still, silent, breath held, and Joy Behar looked, pleased. It was the most unsettling part of the entire scene. While everyone else reacted with fear, confusion, or panic, Joy leaned back in her chair with a smug, victorious smirk stretching across her face. Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who had set a trap and watched it spring shut perfectly. "There it is," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, dripping with triumph. She gestured toward Jelly Roll as though presenting evidence to a jury. "There's the real you, underneath all that redemption talk." Her smile widened, cutting like a knife. Still the same angry criminal, she continued, her tone cruelly calm, just with better clothes. The studio went dead silent. If there had been tension before, now there was paralysis, a level of stillness so intense it felt like the air itself had frozen. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a movement, just Jelly Roll, breathing hard enough that the microphone picked up each inhale, and Joy Behar staring up at him like she was proud of herself. He stared at her with an expression impossible to read at first. Fury, yes, hurt, definitely, but beneath that, something even more dangerous. A kind of sorrowful disbelief, like he couldn't comprehend how someone could look at another human being's pain and choose cruelty anyway. The fire in his eyes dimmed and focused into something sharper, colder. When he finally spoke again, his voice wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't shouting. It was worse. It had dropped into a low, steady, menacing growl, soft enough that the microphone had to strain to catch it, but powerful enough to make the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand up. "You want to see the real me?" he asked slowly, enunciating each word with surgical precision. People in the audience shifted nervously. A producer in the shadows mouthed, "Oh no." Someone else whispered, "Please don't." Jelly Roll leaned forward, his huge frame looming over the desk, his eyes locked on Joy with an intensity that felt almost physical, like pressure, like heat. "You want the real me," he repeated, voice barely above a whisper, but filled with thunder. Joy's smirk faltered for the first time, because she had finally realized something she hadn't provoked a clip. She hadn't provoked entertainment. She had provoked a man who had survived things far worse than talk, show theatrics, and now she was face to face with someone she couldn't bully. Jelly Roll took a slow breath, steadying himself, and when he finally spoke again, his voice carried a gravity that settled over the studio like a storm cloud ready to break. "What I really am," he said, "is someone who knows exactly what rock bottom feels like, not because I read about it, not because I heard someone talk about it on a podcast, but because I lived there, I slept in it, I drowned in it, and every single day that I wake up now, I'm still climbing out of that same darkness." 1 inch at a time, the audience shifted uncomfortably, captivated but uneasy. No one in the room seemed to even breathe. "What I really am," he continued, "is a human being who made terrible decisions that hurt people, broke families, and stained my own soul. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for those choices, even though I know I'll never erase them entirely. That's the truth. That's the real me. Not the version you're trying to paint." He paused deliberately, letting those words settle, sink in, and echo. "But what you are, Joy." He turned his full attention to her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "What you are is someone who gets paid handsomely to tear people down on television. Someone who thinks being mean is the same thing as being insightful. Someone who has never had to fight for anything real in your entire life, so you don't understand what real change looks like." Joy opened her mouth, ready to fire back with some quick retort, But Jelly Roll lifted one hand not loudly, not harshly, but decisively. The gesture alone silenced her. "I'm not done," he said. Those 3 words hit harder than a shout. "You want to talk about accountability?" His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Let's talk about your accountability. How many people who are trying to get clean, trying to rebuild, trying to start over have you discouraged? How many people watched your show, heard your cynicism, and thought to themselves, what's the point of changing if no one will ever see me differently anyway?" He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "How many second chances have you killed with your sarcasm? How many families have stayed divided because someone out their believed redemption wasn't real because of voices like yours insisting it's all an act? How much damage have you done by convincing viewers that people can't truly change?" The questions hit like blows, each one more pointed than the last. Joy's expression shifted from irritation to something more unsettled, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps realization. She wasn't the confident, smirking commentator anymore. She looked like someone who suddenly understood that she had entered a battle she was wildly unprepared for. "You think you're clever," Jelly Roll said, and his tone softened not with kindness, but with disappointment. "You think you're exposing some fraud, some manufactured transformation, but the only thing you're exposing right now is the kind of person you are. Someone who finds it easier to tear people apart than to build even one thing worth anything. Someone who confuses cruelty with intelligence." Sarah Haynes leaned forward, trying to interject with a soothing, neutral comment, anything to cool the room down. But both Joy and Jelly Roll were far beyond hearing her now. Whatever this conversation had started out as, it had transformed into something far more personal, far more philosophical. It was no longer a TV interview. It was a collision of 2 worldviews. This was a debate about human nature itself, whether people are capable of change or doomed to their worst moments forever. "I stand by everything I've said," Joy declared, but her voice trembled ever so slightly. "People have a right to be skeptical of convenient transformations." "Convenient," Jelly Roll repeated, shaking his head slowly as if the word physically hurt him. When he looked at her again, there was something unexpectedly vulnerable, almost sorrowful in his eyes. "You know what the really tragic thing is, Joy? You could have used this moment to have a real conversation, a meaningful conversation. We could have talked about addiction, about criminal justice reform, about the thousands of people trying every single day to rebuild their lives from nothing." His disappointment was palpable, almost haunting. "We could have talked about hope," he said quietly, "but instead you chose cruelty. You chose judgment. You chose to make this about entertainment rather than compassion." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Joy, for a brief moment, seemed to feel the weight of what he was saying. Her eyes flickered downward, as though she was truly considering his words, but the vulnerability lasted only a heartbeat. Her defensive instincts snapped back into place, and she straightened her posture in her seat like a soldier preparing for battle. "Don't lecture me about entertainment," she snapped. "This is journalism. This is asking the tough questions that other people are afraid to ask. If you can't handle scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be putting yourself in the public eye." Jelly Roll's laugh was sharp, bitter, and entirely humorless. "Tough questions," he repeated. "If this is what you call tough questions, then let me return the favor." The studio went still again. "When was the last time," he asked, "that you admitted you were wrong about anything? When was the last time you showed genuine compassion, real compassion, not performative outrage for someone who made mistakes? When was the last time you actually tried to help someone climb out of their darkness instead of shoving them deeper into it for ratings?" Each question landed with the force of a verdict. Joy said nothing. Jelly Roll leaned back in his chair, but his words continued filling the room like thunder rolling across a sky that refused to clear. "You hold a microphone every day," he said. "Imagine what you could do if you used it to lift people up instead of tearing them down." And then the silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but transforms it.